In this video, we're going to talk about the metronome. Now, the metronome is a complicated tool. Many musicians hate the metronome. I think so many of us as children were tortured with it, that it's just one of those pieces of furniture that we would rather see not exist anymore. However, it can be a very useful tool, and I want to bring up an idea of how we control sort of fast passages. I think the metronome is something that can be used to help create speed, but it's also something that can be relied on too extensively that we can use it as a crutch, and we can't hold our speeds without it. So using it, I think, is a tricky procedure, and so I just want to give some ideas of when you should use it and maybe when you shouldn't use it. Asking one question: if we're playing something that is very fast, how many times can we play it before it starts to get sloppy? Now, that answer will be different for everybody, but for myself, I can, play some kind of a fast passage, let's say, maybe 4 or 5 times in a row, but after that, it's probably, if I don't go back and do some kind of rudimentary slow work or metronomic build, it'll just get sloppy. So certain kinds of passages are just, it's an easy tool, the metronome is, to get the rust off of some sloppy passages as we continue to play things at high speeds. I remember a story when I was at Juilliard. I had a lesson with Mr. Lowenthal, and I walked in and he asked me to sit. He was just finishing a passage and he was practicing with the metronome. And he said, he finished, and as I was listening to his practicing with the metronome, I noticed he really wasn't playing with it at all. So when he finished, I somewhat sarcastically asked, "Mr. Lowenthal, I don't think you played a single beat with the metronome." And in usual Jerry Lowenthal ease, he sat and thought of a witty response, and basically said something like, where is it written that we have to play with the metronome? And it was a good point, and I laughed, and then he basically very nicely went on and explained how he would put it on when he was learning certain pieces just to give him a sense of a pulse, but he didn't really need to play with it. Now, I'm not very good at being able to have the metronome beat in so many random places, but it is a skill that could be helpful to use, and I'll talk about how we could use the metronome in maybe even things like Beethoven's slow movements a little bit later. But right now, let's work on how the metronome can help us speed up passages. The piece that I use the metronome for, certainly in these list transcriptions, is the Earl King, and it's a piece that I don't really feel like I have much need to practice in rhythms or even sort of hands separately. It's just something that just needs to be built in with the repetitive motions of the octaves, and the metronome allows me to work on a couple of different motions that I can use in the repetitive octaves, which can be important. In a piece like this, if you're playing a very light piano or you're playing a very stiff piano, the way you're going to repeat the octaves could be very different. So I play this at basically just 2 metronome speeds, sort of 120. Let me just play a little bit of it, if I can here. There we go. you see I'm rotating my hand in a certain way as I play these octaves, just to allow it to breathe. And after you play this enough with the metronome and you can control the repetitive octaves, you don't necessarily need to breathe so much with that wrist. But if you get stuck on a really heavy piano where you just can't do this single repetition, it can be helpful to be able to default back into that rotating wrist. But here's without the rotating wrist though. So, and then so at 120, I'll usually try to rotate and just be really loose and free. 135, then I'll try to see, once I'm a little bit more warmed up, I can do the repetitive octave more easily once I'm loose. And then full speed is usually about 150. I don't usually like to play things at the metronome full speed. Because it's usually so fast that it kind of kills the breathing, the musicality that you often need to make things work at high speeds, and this metronome is really awful. So I'll often build things up to about 80% with a couple of speeds, and then when I get to the full speed, I just let it go and I don't play it. But it can be good practice actually to play things at full speed with the metronome in the earlier stages, maybe even to play them slightly faster than what you would maybe ideally play on stage, just so that you get used to that adrenaline rush, because when that adrenaline rush kicks in, you probably are going to play faster than what you normally practice at full speed in the practice room. And if you know that you can control it a little faster than ideally you would like to play it, it can be kind of a good safety blanket to fall into. But to practice things at full speed, I just feel you can't breathe and work phrases as nicely as you need to. So using the metronome in a piece like Earl King is helpful. I just do it twice, and then I play it, full speed and see what happens. Another exercise, or different exercise of using the metronome, other than to speed things up, is I find the metronome incredibly helpful in Beethoven slow movements. It's so easy as we play slow movements of Beethoven over and over, we want to milk the emotion out of it, and we end up romanticizing and we cheat the pulse. And so I'll always, after once a month, just kind of go back and throw the metronome on a reasonable speed that I think that I should be playing slow movement, and it always there's sections that I've just moved or slowed down or ended up speeding up, and so I find it can help keep us honest in a lot of Beethoven slow movement playing. I was playing the hammer clavier a couple of years ago, and every couple of months I would put on the metronome just to see if it was the one piece that Beethoven actually has metronome marks for. And I would put it on and not play with it religiously, but just, it was always frightening how much time you would end up manipulating to make phrases work. And ultimately, I think that can detract from the line of a 18-minute slow movement. So I found the metronome quite helpful playing through those movements. Not that I religiously stayed with it, but just to get a sense of the movement and not get bogged down into over-romanticizing the lines.